Hello and welcome. Today I'm going to teach you about an easy, free way to manage large file assets when developing games or mods with a small team. Let's say you've started a new game project. There's a couple of programmers on the team, and some asset creators such as level designers, modelers, animators, or whoever else you might have on the team. How are you going to make sure that everyone has access to the most up-to-date assets and code during development? For managing code, you can use a version control system like Git, which stores your code revisions in a central server, such as GitHub, where everyone can access the latest code either through a graphical interface or command line. This works great and provides plenty of control over the codebase. However, while Git is good at storing code, it is incredibly inefficient at storing large file assets such as textures, models, animations, fonts, and whatever else you might have in your project. This is simply because Git works by storing every single file version change. So if you have a binary file, basically every time you make a change to it, it will store a whole extra copy of that file on the server. For code, it's not a problem because Git can keep track of line differences between new and old versions. So this basically means that making a few small changes to a large texture, for instance, can quickly fill up your Git repository. Fortunately, there are solutions to overcome this issue. There are various cloud-based services available such as Dropbox, Bitbucket, Perforce, and many others that developers can use to manage large file assets more efficiently. However, most of these services come at a cost, which is not ideal for small teams working on a hobby or first-time project. And this is where Google Drive comes in. So, Google Drive has one key application called Google Drive Backup and Sync that allows us to store and modify large file assets quite easily in the cloud. In effect, this means that all members of a team can directly access and modify a native shared folder that automatically updates whenever someone modifies a file. Now, there are some advantages and disadvantages to consider before you start using Google Drive. So let's begin with the pros. So number one, obviously it's free, and it's for unlimited users as well, so as many people as are on your team can access the assets. The second point is it has 15 gigabytes of storage for free, which is quite considerable. The third point is it's easy to use. It has fairly basic version history as well, which is kind of a pro. It is only stored for the last 30 days, however, but it's better than having no version history at all, so it's kind of useful. And then, of course, also it has Windows and Mac support, so it's cross-platform. The only thing it doesn't support is Linux, I believe, as in one of the main platforms. So that brings me on to the cons, actually. The cons start off with the fact that it's only really practical for small teams or projects. Because it is only 15 gigabytes, if you're working on, say, a first-person shooter or any 3D game which has lots of textures and various models and whatnot, after a while you're going to get quite a lot of files and stuff building up. So if you're working on a particularly large game, then that could be a problem. The second point is, although it does have basic version history, it's not a proper control system like Perforce, obviously. Because it's not a proper version control system like Perforce, it should be used alongside Git or some other version control system for managing code. The third point is it's not available on Linux, which I mentioned earlier. So, in essence, if you're in a large team or work in a professional game studio, I definitely do not recommend using this technique. It's likely best to pay for a dedicated version control system that happens to support large file assets, such as Perforce or Bitbucket with Git large file system extension. Of course, this is only possible if you can afford to do so. In fact, actually, there is a potential alternative to this. If your game is going to be under 1 gigabyte in art assets or whatever, then you can actually use Bitbucket Cloud, I believe, for free, and create a private repo, and it has Git large file system support built in. So if you don't think you'll ever need more than 1 gigabyte's worth of large file storage for your various game assets, then that might be an option for you. If you're in a small team also, working on a hobby project that's likely to have more than 1 gigabyte of assets, then in this case Google Drive could be the answer. Right, now I'm going to show you how to set everything up. So, in this example I'm going to create a simple Unity project, but you could use Google Drive with most game engines like Unreal, Source or whatever, as long as you structure your project folders properly. If you wanted to, you could probably use this technique for Half-Life mod, so it's pretty versatile. Right, so to begin, you'll need a Google account. So if you haven't got one already, go ahead and make one. Know that it might be a good idea to create an account just for a project, potentially. That's what I've done for this example. And then that way you have the full 15 gigabytes of space on your drive dedicated for that one Google account. And then you can, of course, share it with your main Google account and with everyone else on the team. But that's not strictly necessary. Once you have a Google account ready, log in at drive.google.com, as I've already logged in here. And from here, basically once you're signed into My Drive, then you can right click and click on New Folder. So this is going to be our project folder. This is basically where all your large file assets are going to be stored. So you can name it whatever you like. I'm going to call mine G Drive Cool Game Assets, I think. So let's create that, hit create, and there you go, so we've got our folder now. So now that folder is created, we can right click it and click on share, and at this point we can share it with our various team members or your main Google account or whatever. So I'm actually going to share it with another account for this demo, which I've set up for this. Now, an important thing to make sure you do as well is to make sure that you click on this button and it has the Can Organize, Add and Edit box selected. That way people can modify the files in the shared folder, otherwise they won't be able to change them. And that's fine. So of course you can add more people if you want, but this will do for now. And there you go, so I've shared that with my main account. You could share this with your team member or whatever, so I'm going to switch over now. So here we are in the team members Google Drive. If you go and share it with me now, and you refresh the page, there we go. Now there's one important step to make before we can set up the backup and sync application on your PC. So first we need to actually right click the shared folder, and we need to click on Add to My Drive. What this basically does is it puts it in a location within our own drive on Google Drive, so that when we back up and sync we can have access to it. It still remains shared though. So now it's added to my drive. If you go into my drive, there it is. So there we go, we've got the shared folder, and that's accessible from my drive and from the original source Google Drive. Right, so that's basically everything you need to set up in Google Drive, to be honest, itself. Now we can download the backup and sync application. So I'll leave a link down in the description, but you can search it up as Google Backup and Sync and download. I believe I've already downloaded it, but I'll show you anyway. So download Backup and Sync, agree and download, and yeah, so I've already got it here. But you can just click save. I'm going to click cancel because I've already got it. And then what you can do is navigate to wherever you downloaded it. Right, so I'm going to double click on that to install it. Click yes to allow changes. And it will download and install it. And there we go, so now installation is complete. We hit close. And there we go, so now Google Drive Backup and Sync is installed. We can get started setting it up so we can access our shared folder. So let's click on get started. So I'm going to sign in with my team member account, which has access to the shared folder, which we moved to my drive. Oh, there we go, I remembered my password at last. Okay. So now that we've signed in, we basically this step. So Google Backup and Sync obviously allows you to back up files from a PC to Google Drive as well. We don't want to use that functionality, however, so we can just uncheck all of these boxes. So just make sure you uncheck all of these basically, so we don't back up anything. We just want sync. So I think this is all good. And click on next. Okay, got it. Now this is the important step. So to begin with, we're going to click on change and forward the location, and we're going to select our directory that we want our shared folder to be in, basically, on our own desktop PC. So in my case, I'm going to use a Unity project as an example. You could do this with any project, as I mentioned earlier. So I go into my Cool Game project here, and you can see in here I've got all my various folders for Unity. I've got my assets in there. So we're going to assets, and I actually create a new folder inside assets, and I'm going to call this Google Drive. And now basically I can select that folder, and that's basically the location now where the shared folder will be inserted. So that's where all the shared assets will be synced and everything. Now the next step is, which is also critical, is to sync only these folders, not sync everything in my drive. So click on sync only these folders. In this case, my Google account only has the one shared folder. But if you had your own personal folders and whatnot, you would want to uncheck all the other boxes. So you can uncheck select all and just select the shared folder. Okay, so that's everything fine. It's got nothing in it at the moment, so it's in 0 megabytes. But once you start adding stuff in, then you'll see it begins to sync up. So that's absolutely everything we need to do here. So if you click on start, it will begin syncing. You can see it's refreshing and everything. There we go, that's all fine. Now if you go back into assets, you can see down here, backup and sync is all set, it's all finished. Just click on got it. You can also click on this, by the way, and see kind of the status of syncing and everything. Do various things like pause syncing or whatnot. But you can see here now Google Drive is got a little tick on it, and that shows that it's been synced. So you can actually see in here that Google Drive is the top level folder where everything which gets synced goes into, and then in there we have our shared folder, G Drive Cool Game Assets, and this is where we will put all our assets. So now, for example, I'm going to take the sprites folder, which has a single image and a meta file from Unity, and I'm going to take the sprites meta and I'm just going to move it into Google Drive, and then from Google Drive I'm going to move it into Cool Game Assets. And now you can see it's syncing. It's got this little icon, this little blue icon on the folders, and once it's finished syncing, all the folders will have that green tick. And you can see here, I think pretty much everything's synced now. So now, if you actually go onto my drive and you go inside G Drive Cool Game Assets, you should see the texture itself appear in a moment. If we refresh the page, there we go. So you can see you've got the sprites folder, it's got our image and everything, it's all synced up. And this basically means that I can access it from obviously this user, but any other team member who has access to the shared folder through Google Drive and Sync or whatever can also now access it. And you can actually see in the original Google account that I created this with, you can actually see inside the folder, if you refresh the page, that it's updated. So Google Drive and Sync is actually quite powerful because it means you can share all these changes across unlimited users, theoretically, which is pretty cool. So that's basically everything you need to know for setting up Google Drive, really. As I mentioned earlier, you can click on this icon down here in Windows and in Anyway, and you can see all the files that have been synced recently. You can open the Google Drive folder in Explorer. So now we have a way to sync large file assets. All you need to do is set up a Git repository or some other version control software for your source code to go alongside it. One option is GitHub, so you can have unlimited collaborators work on the code at no cost if you keep it open source. Or alternatively, you can make a private repository and you can have up to 3 collaborators that can access it for free, I believe. Another alternative is Bitbucket. Now Bitbucket is quite good. As I mentioned earlier, it's actually a good alternative to this system altogether, because you can use Bitbucket with Git large file system extension, and that way wouldn't need to use Google Drive to store large files. However, it does only provide 1 gigabyte, whereas Google Drive provides us with 15 gigabytes instead, so that's a bit better. But Bitbucket actually allows us to, like GitHub, it allows us to create a private repository for free. But unlike GitHub, it allows us 5 users who can collaborate instead of just 3. So it's even better if you have a slightly larger team. Both use Git, so they can be used pretty much in the same way. I won't cover setting up or using a Git repository in this tutorial, as there are plenty of tutorials available elsewhere, but I will briefly talk about creating a gitignore file to prevent uploading your large file assets to your Git repo. Because as I mentioned earlier, the whole point of having this Google Drive is so that you don't upload these large file assets to Git, which can then cause a bloat and just slow it down and make it a pain to use. So for this Unity example project, if I navigate to the project itself, so yeah, if I navigate back into this project, you can see here I've already set it up as a Git repository. It's got readme in a .git folder. But you can basically set up your project, whether it be Unity project, Unreal project, whatever, as a Git repository. And you can actually create a file which will ignore certain extensions and other files and other folders that you don't want to upload to the Git repo, which is important because we don't want to upload any of the stuff inside this Google Drive folder. So, how do you do that? So you can actually right-click and click on New text document, or actually the best way to do it is probably to open up your favorite text editor. So I'm going to use Notepad++. I'm going to create a new file. So I've opened up Notepad++ with a new file, and what we're going to do is add in some folders and files that we want to ignore. So first of all, I'm just going to do the library folder, because Unity generates basically everything inside this folder, and it basically acts as a cache so that it can quickly load assets and stuff in your project. But that's just all auto-generated by Unity. It doesn't need to be uploaded to Git or to your large file system. So we can ignore that in the gitignore file. And of course, we're also going to ignore assets/Google Drive. And this will ignore everything in the Google Drive directory. And I think that's pretty much everything we need to ignore. Optionally, you can ignore other stuff, but generally speaking, you'll want to upload your project settings and your assets folder, except for the Google Drive, all up to Git. I should also mention for Unity, it might be better to upload scenes to Git only because you then have proper version control for your scenes and your prefabs, whereas of course Google Drive has very limited version control, it only has the last 30 days, so it's not very useful if someone breaks something in the scene and you need to try and find out what got broken and when, whereas Git can help you do that more easily. So I would generally keep scenes and prefabs in Git, and of course scripts and shaders all in the normal assets folder, but anything like textures, animations, models can all go inside this Google Drive shared folder for your large file assets. So now that we've finished this gitignore file, we can go ahead and save it. So I'm going to actually save it in the root directory of the Git repository. So yeah, so here we go. So this is the top level of the Git repository and Unity project itself. And what we can do is you can, down here where it says save as type, select all types. So scroll up and select all types. And then what we're going to call it is .gitignore. And then we can go ahead and hit save. And that will save it as our gitignore file. And now to test that that's actually working, you can actually go ahead and open up the command line if you have Git installed inside that directory. Load up the command line, and you can type in git status, And it should, there we go, so it shows us everything apart from the library and the assets/Google Drive folder. So now if we actually add, say, assets, oops, so if we say git add assets, it should add everything in the assets folder except for the Google Drive. So if we now type in git status, you can see what's been added. And perfect, so we can see the scenes have been added. But if we go into assets, none of the stuff in this Google Drive folder has been added. So that's working perfectly. So that's basically all there is to it. So use Git or some other version control system for your code and scenes and prefabs if you're working in Unity or another project, just your code or whatever. But you can use Google Drive for your large file assets with backup and sync, and it works pretty well. So I'll put links down in the description for setting up backup and sync and whatnot. Hope this helps, and I'll see you when I see you.